and this is the rules that they chose to
Yeah.
fight by. They wrote the rule book of this war, and they're the ones who are suffering the worst consequences. And really, it's really unfortunate that they're civilians, and many of them have nothing to do with this. They're suffering.
We just want to live in peace, and they're violent. Yeah, because we took most of their land and are saying accept it. They're not accepting it, and they act violent towards us. So I just don't think that framework works. Like, one of the reasons why October 7th was successful is because we moved multiple brigades to the West Bank because things were heating up here. Because we're holding all this contested territory, we neglected Gaza. So to hold Syria, you could find a way to see some strategic advantage, but there's also a cost.
But like, my question is that you see that in nature too, right? Two packs of hyenas, right? Or two packs of lions fighting over territory. And it's enormous hunting territory. One can scientifically draw up the borders and say, guys, there's enough protein, there's enough prey in this land for both groups of lions. But you're not taking into account, future growth and drought. I mean, it's a very hard like calculation to make. But even if you were to make that, right, what are the two groups of lions really fighting over? They're fighting over survival, they're fighting over resources, right?
Yeah.
Humans are the same thing.
But I don't think we have I don't think our
You think
problem
we
is.
should be this way?
Well, currently we still have a lot of, we act like lions when we should be acting like humans. We still have a scarcity mindset in a world of abundance. So I think often we think we're fighting for survival, but it's really just like Stone Age wiring that we haven't evolved past, where we constantly feel like we're constantly in fear and feel like there's a threat, and often it's irrational and leads us to make bad decisions.
So my other question to you would be that, let's say I would agree with you that it would be best that we humans conducted ourselves at a higher plane and we didn't,
Which is the point of religion, Agav, right? Like
Yeah.
that. Yeah, we're not meant to be animals. We're meant to be above animals.
That's a fair point, right? Let's assume though that you and I agree on that point, right?
Mhm.
But would you not agree that in a world where the other side doesn't play by those rules, you can't afford to? I know you'll say we're bigger than them, we're stronger than them, we're talented. But do you have another argument other than, oh, we can afford to now because we've won a few wars and we've pushed it
more
off?
so like the way I think about it is, what's more dangerous, a very powerful military that doesn't follow international law, or a terrorist organization that doesn't follow international law? Right?
Could you could you answer the question from the perspective of the self-interest of our group, not from an objective perspective
So if I want
for
to
the
look at it
world?
purely self-interested, I would say that because we violate international law, we isolate ourselves internationally.
Yeah, as we said last
Yeah,
time.
yeah. So that's the purely self-interested argument is our actions make people like us less and will lead to our isolation. From a humanist perspective, it's much easier. You could defend it from many different angles, that perspective. But the reason why I don't blame Israelis for how they see the world is because it's very normal to be purely self-interested. Like, I do think that our aggression is leading us to be isolated, but that's not an obvious
You're saying is
conclusion to reach.
you're making an argument in the interest of our strategic, like for our geopolitical interest.
Well, I
Okay.
make it from the way I look at it is primarily from a humanist perspective, but the way I explain it I don't expect Israelis to be humanists. It's unrealistic. I don't expect Palestinians to be humanists. People in war don't care about the people they're fighting.
Right, because we're in survival mode.
Exactly. So that's not, I'm not gonna, like, sometimes I'll appeal to emotion. I say, think about what we've done to them. But when I actually say that, I say, I appeal to our survival and why international support will increase our chance of survival. But I also appeal to something else. I say, we want them to accept us. To think that we will oppress them into accepting us is not realistic. But I still bring it back to our strategy of self-preservation.
My question specifically to you is, right, in a world where it's asymmetrical, right, where we would hold ourselves to standards of international law, but our enemies don't. in specific cases, torture of prisoners, taking civilians hostage without any due process,
Mhm. Uh, we,
without
we,
any connection.
we do both those things,
Yeah, but
you
when I
know.
say without any due process, when we go out and take civilians, it's
That's
usually
true. We're not taking babies and elderly, you
not only
know.
we're not taking babies, but even those innocent civilians or civilians that have been proven to be guilty, right? We're motivated out of fear, and someone in the system believes that this guy is going to kill people, our people, and that's why we're taking him,
Right.
or he's part of that. So maybe that's why he's being arrested. It could be that he didn't. It could be the due process isn't due enough or not processy enough. That may be the case, but that's the motivating factor. The Our enemies, when they kill uh, athletes in Munich or kidnap civilians, their motivation is to bring us to our knees and to completely displace us. That's what they say their motivation is.
Right.
And if we took both of us on our word, we say our motivation is to prevent us from getting killed. They say their motivation is to free their country from the river to the sea and actually get rid of all of us in the worst case, or just maybe let us live here under their rules in the best case. So my question to you is, how do you deal with the challenge of asking one side to play by rules that the other side refuses to play by? It would be if you came to me and you said, "Look, you guys are bombing buildings in Gaza and killing civilians, but Gaza doesn't do that. They're not like they agreed
Right.
not to
So,
shoot rockets
but
if it's not on a military
again,
base."
I would say that
How would you answer that?
I would say there's no way to really look at that without recognizing how powerful we are, and that with power comes
Well,
responsibility.
only the power dynamic, that the
Yeah, but
discrepancy in power
I think
dynamic.
it that's
That would be
I
your
think it's
argument.
extremely relevant. So I'll give you an example. Hamas, let's say Hamas wants to maximize civilian harm, which I don't even think that's how they look at it. But let's say they want to maximize civilian harm. Okay, on their most successful day in history, they maximized civilian harm and killed around 800 Israeli civilians. Take the same approach and say we want to maximize civilian harm, we could kill millions in a day.
Yeah.
So this whole idea that like we need to meet them on their level
Well, I thought we need him.
doesn't make sense with the amount of power we
I'm
have,
not saying
you know?
we should meet them at their level, but what I would say is that if they want to benefit from the rules of civilized, let's call them Western nations,
Yeah.
when they go to war with each other, they have to play by those rules as well. It's
Well, but the problem is
you
this.
may think we should anyway, like we should anyway, be better and so on. I agree that in general that's the case, but I feel that if you're fighting an enemy, right, and I also disagree with the idea that they're smaller than us. It's a very We discussed that a bit last time. I see that as a very disingenuous argument because they're purposely smaller than us because when they were larger they were defeated, so basically it was the whole Arab world against the whole Jewish world. The whole Arab world could not defeat us. So they divested from militarily attacking us, and they just
But they're
politically
not.
and
I mean,
financially
no
attacked
matter
us.
like we could look at 48 and
Basically what
wait, wait, hold on. If in
yeah.
48 and by the end of 48 we outnumbered them and outarmed them, I believe we weren't. It wasn't this narrative like five armies. They sent like short. It was a symbolic.
I
Like
agree
that's
that
part of our
not a
victim
victim. I
narrative, you
agree
know.
that
But
every
like
group tries to
five armies
glorify.
attacked.
Everybody tries to glorify themselves, and we're victim to that as well. And I'm well aware of the
שלחו
statistics.
כמה ערבים
But
אלינו,
the truth is though that they all partook. They all sent militaries. They invested resources,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
they
no, no.
risked their
So
lives
let me
in
explain
this
this.
war.
In that moment when we were
And same with
hold
67,
on.
by the
In
way.
that moment when we were, I don't think much weaker than them, but let's say we had an equal level of power, I think, and we faced an existential threat, if we wanted to bend the
I don't.
rules,
I disagree with equal. I think we were weaker.
maybe at the beginning.
The fact that they sent terrible quality soldiers, and the fact that many of their units couldn't even find Palestine because their navigation sucked, and the fact that
And they didn't send many. They didn't send their whole army. They sent a few
the
brigades, you
fact
know?
that they didn't run their war correctly, it's still country against country, or against a group of countries that had standing armies against a non-state
So
entity
wait, so
that just
no,
was
no. So,
founded
so
a
I'll
day
put it this
earlier.
way. Let's say they were more powerful than us, and we faced existential threat, and we saw some advantage we can get by violating international law. I wouldn't complain about that. I think it's
You're
If
saying now that we're stronger,
yeah, no, I mean,
but this is where I
now
disagree
we're
with
like
you.
infinitely stronger. It's unimaginable how much stronger we are.
So I see that argument that we're infinitely stronger as a deeply not in your. I don't mean I don't think that you're disingenuous, but I think that it's deceptive. We're strong. They've chosen to take a weaker path in the sense that they've chosen
But
that
who's
the
they? The
not
Palestinians?
let's just call it the anti-Israel alliance. So it starts from Palestinians, and it could be communists in Russia, and there's an alliance of Israel haters who would rather Israel doesn't exist, who sees us as a foreign entity, as some sort of a colonial thing that needs to disappear, right? Anti-Zionist world who had in the past their weapons against us was guns and planes and tanks and technology. When they saw that they're losing on that front and they cannot win on that front, they chose to run the war in a different way by further victimizing these newfound Palestinians, weren't Palestinians before. Now that we're going to call them Palestinians, we're going to use them as a weapon, and we're going to use their weakness, their misery, and their victim status as a way to, as a further weapon. In other words, the victim status of the Palestinians is their greatest weapon right now, because that's what causes the world to take their side. People like the underdog. We were the underdog before.
They learned a lot from us.
And they've, but yeah, maybe, but with them, it's pure propaganda. So when you tell me that, oh, they're weaker, I say that, in fact, I don't look at it just as the Palestinians. I look at the enemy as this entity of anti-Israel forces
But that's but
that are our enemy, and they are stronger than us, and the victimness of the Palestinians is part
but
of their strength.
stronger in what way? Right now, there's no relevant military threat that we face from a country that's even close to as strong as us. So you could say that they have a strong PR department and promoters all over the world, which would be like the Muslim world that supports them. But like in terms of the force each side possesses, I mean, there's no comparison. And it's not only it's not as simple as saying because we're stronger, we need to show more restraint. If they were equally strong to us, then we should both show that restraint.
But
Because
we saw that when they were even close, look, every time they feel that they're strong enough to attack us, look how they behave. October 7th is an example, but it's not the only example. October 7th was a moment in time where Hamas leadership felt that they can bring Israel to its knees, right?
I'm not sure that's what
They didn't,
I don't
you,
think that's
do
how
you
they
think
looked at it.
Hamas leadership knew that what they're doing to Gaza? And if they did, you think they would have done it anyway?
I think that if they didn't think that this was a possibility, then they're dumb. I think
No, they thought it was a possibility, but they believed that there's a chance that they can defeat us. They had a plan to get to Air Force bases and shut them down. They
no,
thought Hezbollah would join them.
I don't think that they actually thought that this is that this can defeat Israel. I think they
Do you think they
in the short term, it was a victory of morale. It was to get prisoners released and maybe to isolate Israel internationally because they knew what our response would be. Like in the big picture, they very well may have won because we might have lost global support
that's a
in the
good
next
point. So
generation.
you're saying that they're willing to embark on a war, kill as many Israeli innocent civilians as they can, and as well as kill as many Palestinian civilians as will be killed as a result of said
Exactly. Yeah.
war, in order to win a political victory.
You're right. Which you
Bro,
could
do
say
you
is a
realize what that
psychopathic.
no, but you realize what that means? That means that their victimhood is a weapon. It's stronger than a nuclear weapon to a large extent. Because that's a weapon. Basically what you're saying, if what you're saying is true, and I think it might be true, I think they actually thought they had a chance. But if you're saying they thought this through, and either they defeat us or they lose, so many innocents die, the conflict gets propagated generations ahead,
Hmm.
and now Israel loses the PR war. That means that the anti-Zionist, anti-Israel world
Hmm.
has chosen to use these tragic figures, call them the Palestinians, as a tool with which to just further destroy Israel. That's the
Well,
saddest thing in the world to
I
imagine.
would say the Palestinian
You
leadership
want to
made
turn
that.
that light on
Yeah,
so then it'll
I don't
probably be
think that's
better.
their world. By the way, is this being recorded? Oh, okay,
There's
cool.
a red light.
I didn't know we were okay. Um, I would say, yeah, yeah.
You guys are gonna have
Yeah,
to
yeah,
come
yeah,
again
yeah, yeah,
next week
yeah,
now.
yeah. So I would say that the case can be made that Hamas leadership, that is their approach. We are going to show the world how vicious and brutal Israel is by triggering this response. We're going to attack them in a way that they're going to respond with such force that the world will turn against them. I could see that being their motivation, and they were actually successful in that. Now,
What does that tell you about the basic
but
basis of your argument
wait, no, but I
of
think
them
I
of
think
them being weaker? Does that make them weaker, or in the geopolitical sense? I mean, if you look at the big picture,
well,
militarily they are
but
weaker,
that
but they
that's
are
but that
stronger.
that's how our expectation of a party to abide by international law should increase with the amount of power that each party has. For example, I would say that Israel should certainly be held according to a standard of international law. But I think if the United States or China are violating international law, that's a graver concern than if Israel is doing it because of the power they have.
But why shouldn't it be dependent on the conflict?
No,
International law
it should
is
be
it's like
it
the
should be
UFC.
universal.
It's like the UFC. If you're in the UFC, right, and your opponent is scratching and biting or hitting you with a
Yeah.
hammer, you can do the same thing unless someone separates you.
Imagine you have a UFC fight with a UFC champ against a 2-year-old, and then the 2-year-old like does a low blow and like, you know what, I'm gonna low blow you back. It's like, bro, you're fighting a 2-year-old. You could follow the rules if you're a UFC champ
Yeah,
against a 2-year-old. Well, that's
but
kind of that's like,
I see that. I see that. But I don't see our opponent to consider the Palestinians a 2-year-old. To me, is a naive argument. It's a false one because I see the Palestinians as an extension of a larger geopolitical movement to
but they don't
displace us from our
they
land.
don't they're not posing a military threat right now. In fact, most of our neighbors we have relative peace with. But I'm also not arguing that.
After we
Wait,
defeated
hold on.
them
I'm
militarily.
also not arguing that Hamas should be able to violate international law without repercussions. The ICC issued arrest warrants for Hamas leadership. I think that's great. I think that we should try to hold all people accountable, but the level of concern we have over violation of international law, for good reason, should increase the more powerful an entity
I
is
actually
because,
accept that
yeah,
argument in principle, but I feel that if you have a group of people whose existence is being challenged, whose survival is being publicly challenged, and their atrocities are being perpetrated on them, and this what I consider an uneven war is being a guerrilla war is being waged on them using civilians as basically as human shields. It may sound cliche, but that's really what it is. I think in such a case, asking the victim or the people being attacked to follow international law is unfair. Like if because we didn't choose these rules. We spent. I have to spend. So if I buy a house in Israel, a certain percentage of my mortgage is going to pay for a mamad, right?
hmm
So someone in the government level made sure that enormous costs are being paid so that our civilians can survive the wars that we know our enemies are planning on us, which
right,
will target civilians. Now, these guys build tunnels under the ground where they hide hostages themselves, their families, as we saw with Sinwar's family, and weapons. And they put no thought at all into the civilians. Now, it's unfortunate that civilians get hurt in any fight, in any war. But for us to take that into account at the expense of our own strategic goals is asking us to violate our responsibility to ensure the survival of our people.
so. So I think this is an argument, though, that there's no end to how far you can make it, because again, I think that we can we can decide tomorrow, you know what? Our best chance of survival is to just ethnically cleanse every single Palestinian living on the land, even Palestinian citizens of Israel. Is it ethical? No. Is it legal according to international law? No. Will it increase the chance of our survival? One can argue that.
There is such an argument.
Right, but
I've
so,
heard that
no,
argument.
but so,
I disagree with it, but
but there's a right. There's a problem with violating human rights because it makes you feel more safe. Like we need to be very careful with that justification. And I think the way I look at it is, do you believe that humans should have an inalienable right to life? Like it's just a good value we should.
I think that they do. But I believe that that right to life needs to be protected and enforced, or I shouldn't say needs to, but is protected and enforced on a group level. So sometimes two groups of humans have a conflict. India and Pakistan have a conflict today. It's the job of Modi to protect the lives of Indian citizens, and it's the job of whatever the Pakistan government guy's name is to protect the lives of the Pakistani people. And if those two end up in an unfortunate war, they're both required to fight in that war as efficiently as possible while defending the lives of their own citizens. If tomorrow India gets attacked, God forbid, by a tactical nuke from Pakistan,
Hmm.
and India, the Prime Minister of India, Defense Department of India doesn't, this theoretical scenario, doesn't attack Pakistan back and kill enough of them to deter them because they're worried about the right to life, they would be remiss on their responsibility. So while I do believe in an inalienable right to life, I think it's my responsibility, my job, not just because I'm in Miluim, but just as a Jewish man, an Israeli man, to worry about the right to life of Israelis over others. And I think that other nations have the same exact responsibility to each other. And that sometimes creates a conflict. And again, each side is responsible for its own.
So you don't think that the warring party has any responsibility over the lives of the country it's at war with?
I believe that on a secondary in the sulam and the ladder of priorities.
Hmm.
I think that the first priority is their own. The second priority would be everyone else. So yeah, I think that if you're bombing your enemies and you're not taking into account civilians at all, and for no real military advantage, you're killing your civilians, that would be evil and that should be prosecutable. I think that it's very hard to measure these things
Right.
because war is messy and these things are messy. And you can look back at World War II, what we as in the West did with Japan and Germany and so on, and we can question, was that moral, was that not moral? But ultimately, it's the responsibility of the each leadership of and the leadership of
Right.
each nation to worry about that, and then to worry about their enemies as a second layer of that
So
priority.
I would say that, and this is the a major motivation for passing international law after World War II was that we understood that there's no real incentive to care about the civilians of the nation you are at war with, which becomes increasingly dangerous with our advancement in weaponry, right? So now we're at a situation where no military would want to sacrifice their own at the expense of saving civilians of their enemy. That's very natural. That's not just Israel.
Yeah,
Israel isn't the only country that functions that way. All militaries in war would function with a similar incentive. And this is why I believe international law is important because it aligns incentives. It says you need to care about those civilians. If not, there will be consequences. And I think that's an important advancement that we made as a species, as um, to create just a greater world order that could protect civilians
I agree.
against these advanced weapons.
I agree, but again,
So
I see it as in boxing, as in UFC. I believe that once you enter the ring of warfare and you want protections of international law, you can't flagrantly violate that.
I understand that argument, but then what we're saying is if you live under the leadership of a government that doesn't care about you, then another country is allowed to come and violate your right to life, right? Essentially, what we're saying, because Hamas doesn't play by the rules, whatever Palestinian civilians we kill, that's on them. But then, so that inalienable right to life cannot just simply be dependent on Hamas doing the right thing. It needs to be more universal than that.
It does, but again, but two things I'll say to that. There's what would be nice and what's the reality. And the way you're describing it, as if Hamas is some terrorist organization that doesn't control the Gaza Strip for the last, I don't know, 10
No,
years or
that's
so.
exactly what they are.
So since no, they are the government of Gaza. They had an enormous level of popular support. Polls immediately after October 7th, Gazans were not totally against that, and it doesn't mean they deserve to die. I don't think that a Gazan civilian deserves to die because he's an extremist on the phone when he answers a pollster. I'm a bit more mature than that, but I do think that in the ultimately the responsibility of the leadership of Gaza, which is Hamas, was to think about it. So when they built all those tunnels, they could nothing stopped them from building tunnels to put their own people when the inevitable Israeli bombardment would come.
Hmm.
The fact that they didn't do it means that all of the horror of Israel's so-called war crimes or violations of international law is not on us because we did it in a bid to survive, whereas they did it in a bid to um, displace us, to
I mean,
so on.
I think
And that's basic. That's basically my argument about that.
right. I mean, the not on us though. I don't think it's not about saying like we don't need to choose who's more responsible for the destruction of Gaza. I mean, I think it's a relevant argument, but I'm very happy to say both Israel and Hamas are complicit in the mass murder of Gazan civilians. I think that's a very legitimate statement. So we could both be responsible, and in society we have shared responsibility in many concepts, right? It seems like in
But
war
we disagree on the principle because if Israel is killing Gazan civilians in a bid for to ensure the survival of Israeli civilians, and Hamas
but
is killing uh, nobody really numbers wise in a bid to kill Israeli civilians. In other words, they're in a bid to kill as many Israeli civilians. They're and to terrorize us. They're willing uh, to sustain so much civilian damage and carnage that it's not like we're both responsible. You got one group literally trying to survive, and you have another group trying to commit a Holocaust. That's the difference between the two groups.
it's interesting because if you said that, people won't know which side is which. That's a
Well,
statement that
the
both.
Holocaust is a terrible word. It's been used, but
But I'm just saying like
one
that.
side stated we're out to kill them all at worst and kick them all out at best. That's what they said they're going to do, and that's what they started doing. Then, as a result, they lose 50,
So
60,000
yeah,
civilians,
but
whatever the number is. It's tragic, but it's on them. They began the war.
wait.
They
So
wrote the rules
okay.
for this
So
conflict too.
I wanna
We didn't write the rules.
I wanna
Israel never
wait.
said, but Israel never said, we'd like the death toll to be 60,000. Israel said we'd like our hostages back, and we'd like Gaza to be a prosperous seaport Palestinian entity that we can trade with and have open borders with. That's what Israel wants. Israel doesn't benefit from killing 60,000 Gazans. Israel killed the amount of Gazans they killed, whatever the number is, in a bid to survive. You could say that it wasn't the best chance. We
correct.
didn't fight as well as we should or
If
as
we
efficiently as we should, but that's what our attempt was.
right, I think the framing you're giving is looking at us as two equal sides that just happen to be in a disagreement. But if we look at other examples, other colonial movements, and we could talk about whether this constitutes a colonial movement or something else. I imagine that the early European settlers on the Americas did not want to kill millions of Native Americans. The Native Americans just should have surrendered and not resisted their land getting taken, right? That, but do you really think that's a legitimate argument when thinking about it in the context of the Native Americans against the early colonizers or the Europeans that conquered the Aboriginals in Australia? And every single example we've ever had of one population coming and claiming a land for their own was met with violence. And obviously, the conquering land would wish that the population would just accept them. Why would they want to engage in violence? They're not here for violence. They're here to maintain sovereignty over a piece of land that's contested. That those who get what's taken from them are the ones who are more likely to engage in violence. And I think there's a strong case to be made that that is rightful violence. So for us to frame it and say, we just want to live in peace and they're violent, yeah, because we took most of their land and are saying accept it. They're not accepting it, and they act violent towards us. So I just don't think that framework works. And also just going back to Gaza, unless you want to stay on this thread of like looking at the dynamic of how we came here and how they perceive it. If not, I have like a thread on Gaza I'd
On
like.
Gaza, I'll just respond in short
Okay.
that whatever the world and the internet thinks about Israel's claim to the land. Israelis who live here, myself, my family, we were born here. We see this as our land. We don't see ourselves as settlers from Europe who came to the Americas, and we don't see ourselves as South African Boers who came to South Africa. We see ourselves as native to this land. We feel we have roots here. We say this at every opportunity. We've been saying it for 2,000 years, and it doesn't negate other people's indigeneity, right? But to think that you can treat this conflict as a colonial enterprise is a terrible strategy.
So I actually agree with that.
And I know you agree with that, and that's why I'm saying that. So I would word it differently, and I understand that they see it that way. In other words, our
Well, but
enemies see
that's
it
the
that way.
important part, right?
But
I'm more so interested in, regardless of if we are a colonial entity or an indigenous population who returned, to them we're indistinguishable. So the way they're going to respond is as most before them responded, and that's with violence. That's
so
like
again,
the
if you
expectation that they
treat
see us as this indigenous population is just not realistic.
so the reality is, if you're going to treat, uh, let's not decide who's indigenous and who isn't. Okay,
I think we both are, by the way.
fair enough. But I'm not addressing the empirical issue, because those
Hmm.
who think that I'm a European Khazar aren't going to be convinced otherwise, and those who think that Arabs are Arabians who've been imported here to work for the Zionists aren't going to think otherwise. There's probably a tiny bit of truth in both arguments that's stretched by each side
Yeah.
for propaganda purposes. But if you look at the actual world that we live in, okay, if you treat a native population, or at least a population that sees itself as native, that has roots here, and you act as if we don't have roots here, and you treat us as if we're colonials, right? And you manage your dispute with us that way, it's a recipe for total disaster, because both sides are continue to infuriate each other. I
Yeah.
agree that if we do that to the Palestinians, it's just as infuriating. And I don't engage personally in this argument that they don't, they came from Arabia and they don't belong here. I don't engage in that kind of argument, because whether that's true or not is irrelevant to the fact that subjectively that's how they feel. But I expect that both sides understand that. Now, being that right now we have the upper hand on both levels, we've defeated the Arab world militarily, and the Palestinians, with their terror, are doing good in getting, popular support for their cause, but it doesn't look like they're able to displace us. If they continue to act this way, it's going to cause greater and greater catastrophe. It's a recipe for endless catastrophe, because, and I mean the word catastrophe like in its Arabic
Yeah.
terms.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a recipe for more Nakba, because what's going to happen is the Jews here, myself included, we're going to feel that we don't have a partner to deal with. We can't live together with these people. They'll never accept us as actually belonging here. And every deal we make with them is going to be disingenuous plan to actually displace us in
Right.
the end. What's going to end up happening is one group is going to displace the other group.
Correct.
And I use the word displacement generously. It could be worse than that, but that's what's going to end up
Anywhere
happening.
from ethnic cleansing to
To
genocide.
genocide,
Yeah.
yeah,
All
and
right.
I think that it's one group is going to do it to the other, and the way things have gone until now, we have the upper hand. So, as an Israeli Zionist, I would tell my um, interlocutors,
Hmm.
Palestinian, pro-Palestinians, you don't want to take this conflict to its logical conclusion. If you're a Western person who looks at this as a spectator sport, maybe it's one thing, but if you actually care about humanity, the way it's going now, it's you're going to cause a reluctant Israeli population to
Hmm.
ethnically cleanse everyone, because they just can't deal, most of
Right.
them at least, because they can't deal with it, and therefore, I just feel very uncomfortable with the whole indigenous argument, and the idea of and comparing it to the Native Americans, because we see ourselves as Native Americans too.
So, uh, yes, I hear that, and I don't actually think the indigenous argument matters so much because does an indigenous person deserve more individual rights than a native born of that country? Like, I just don't think that's the right argument.
In the woke
But
world, that
but
may be the case, but
but
yeah.
explaining using Native Americans as example, it's just explaining a very common dynamic between groups of humans and what a common response to that is. So even if we view ourselves as the Native Americans, the whole framing is
So just like you can understand that they would act as barbaric as Native Americans, understand that so would we. an Israeli Jew comes to Jerusalem and he sees Arabs, Muslims
but no
controlling the
no
Temple
but
Mount,
that
he
so
has the same
yeah but
feeling that the Muslim
but
has.
that's concerning. A Native American, call a savage Native American with nuclear weapons is much more concerning than one with a hatchet. So that's the thing. I we
I
we
don't see us as a
we
savage Native American because I see that even though
but we
we've
don't.
perpetrated savagery in a bid to survive. We've never perpetrated savagery to pursue some geopolitical interest. We don't perpetrate savagery
So
in
wait, hold on.
Lebanon because we want to control Lebanon for its finance to make because we want to make money on clubs in
So
Beirut.
let's
We
get
did
let
it because the UFO, I was going to say, the PLO was there. We did it because Hezbollah is there. Like if there would be no PLO and Hezbollah, Israel doesn't have an interest in
wait.
Lebanon,
So
unlike what many
you want to talk.
pro-Palestinians
So
say.
the whole premise that we do it all for survival, I think, is problematic, as I mentioned earlier, because there's no limit to that. So we could point to very clear examples of things we've done in Gaza that we didn't need to do. Had we not done them, we would still be here. We'd still be just as safe. One of them is just the level of proportionality. We decided that it's okay to kill up to 20 Palestinian civilians to kill one member of Hamas. Doesn't even need to be a high ranking level. That's a choice. We have wiped well over 1,000 families off the face of the earth. They no longer exist. Not a single member of the family. Why? Because we were
How
waiting
many?
well over 1,000 at this point. Um, we would we would wait for Hamas militants to go back home and be with their families, and we'd destroy the entire building, their family, their neighbors. This is all a choice. This is not necessary for survival. This is us with a very powerful army acting as savages. It's a very dangerous combination. Um, you have the destroying medical infrastructure, destroying power plants and water salination plants, individual soldiers just shooting any teenager or male they see, even if they're unarmed. Because think about that. This is a security argument. If you're in Gaza, you value your life over the life of your enemy. Why not shoot every man you see? Why take that risk, right?
So
There's no end to this, and many are doing that. That when there's these no-go zones, we evacuate these areas, and it's not always clear what the evacuated area is. Once people evacuate, there's mass arrests of all the young men. So there's a lot of reason why people are choosing not to evacuate. Our policy in these areas is just shoot everybody. The more extreme units are saying you could shoot anybody, the less extreme units are saying any man you could just shoot. We could argue this is for our security, but this is us not recognizing how much power we have. And there's just endless examples
you're
of
making an
these.
argument that in this war of survival, Israel has acted disproportionately.
Yeah,
That's
I
your
mean,
argument, and that's what
more so than I think.
is
Like
warranted.
no, more so than like
Anyone else?
Assad, Putin. Give me an example. Any example you could find that's worse is widely recognized to be a genocide. There's no war that will be worse in terms of
So
proportion.
again, the genocide term. I'm
We
an
don't need to
expert.
argue terminology.
I
I'm
don't do
not.
terminology in international law. I don't really. I don't. We've discussed this in the last
Yeah.
meeting. I don't really consider that. I don't consider that a valid argument when our survival is at stake. So if I'm gonna, I don't care about law of my country if I'm fighting to survive and the country isn't protecting me, right? So I don't care about international law when international law isn't really defending me, my people, my nation from annihilation, which is
Mm-hmm.
being openly planned by, and stated by its enemies.
Mm-hmm.
So setting law aside, I don't know. I haven't um, I haven't witnessed most of the things you say. It doesn't mean it's not true. But when I did go back to Miluim after many years after being exempt from Miluim due to age and being over the hill, the first thing,
You're still strong.
yeah, I get physically strong, but yeah, they I've become a rabbi. I do intellectual stuff now. But the first thing they did before they gave me that gun was to spend a few hours explaining to me the rules of engagement. And for a
Mm-hmm.
few hours, they told me, well, this is what you do, and you can't shoot civilians. And if you feel threatened by a civilian, you got to shoot in the ground, and you got to, they taught you a few phrases in Arabic to get them
Mm-hmm.
to desist, to shoot in the air. So much effort was put. And then they double and triple checked. And I had to fill out a test, a questionnaire that I understood the rules of engagement. And every time, and I'm doing Miluim here in the greater Bethlehem area, every time a gun went off, either from me or from any of my friends in my unit, we were always questioned and interrogated. Was it necessary? Did anyone get hurt? And if someone did get hurt, the guys who shot them would get into trouble, or they'd leave the unit, or they wouldn't get criminally charged if they're in the military, but the military court deals with it. They took it seriously. Now, I can understand that in a place like Gaza, things get out of hand, and I'm not going to like defend things that are abhorrent. If in fact those things are true, that's something I personally don't accept and I don't think is legitimate. And I would be very disappointed in my people if they acted inhumanely, even at a time like this. That being said, I wasn't there and I don't know the details. I know that you can probably put this in the show. There was an incident in Jerusalem a few months ago where a Arab guy from Jerusalem got shot by an Israeli, and it was making rounds in the in all the like resistance and pro-Palestine, and it was, you see me in the video with my
Right, I saw
gun.
that going around. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and it's like, oh,
What was it in
settlers,
Jewish Chaos? They
yeah,
posted that. Yeah.
settlers shoot another. And I was there. I didn't shoot the guy. I called the ambulance. I called the cops. The guy who shot him his gun was taken away and he was questioned. It was a misunderstanding. Just for those of you who want to know, you can post a video in the thing just to use as an example. Um, the guy, Arab kid, went to a Jewish prom party and he got drunk. See, that happens in Israel. And when he was drunk, he made the unfortunate error of yelling Allahu Akbar and other scary things in a time of war. And someone panicked and shot him in the leg. Okay, that's what happened. I didn't see that happening, but I showed up 5 minutes after that, and the video of me on my phone is me calling the police and the ambulance and making sure that they show up in time. I didn't have a tourniquet on me. I was in uniform, but I didn't have my whole kit, so I couldn't do much. And that's what happened then. And the reason I bring it up is that people sometimes in fog of war, all sorts of things happen. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm sure
Hmm.
atrocities were committed, but I'm not sure it's at the level of the propaganda that's put out by our enemies.
I feel like you guys are dodging around the key disagreement that's going on here about
Which
the
is,
survival element. I feel like
to
Adar
be honest,
pointed out that
I'm a little disappointed if that's shit happened in Gaza. I'm sure terrible things
Well,
happen
but
in
so
Gaza, but
we don't need to
it doesn't change the foundational argument
we
well,
don't
it
need to
that
get
justifies
the
it. It
war is just.
justifies the reason.
so real quick. You spoke about laws of engagement, and actually, I could confirm that to be true. Having served in the IDF, the laws of engagement
I have to
are
put on my vest. My soldiers, or whatever, the guy who's doing
okay.
Shmirah is leaving,
The
and
the
I wrote these rules, so I got to keep them.
the laws of engagement are such that to minimize harm, you're meant to give multiple warnings. If they still don't stop, you shoot at the legs, or you shoot in the air and then at the legs. Sure. In war, that often goes out the window, but it's also, and I speak to soldiers who have served in Gaza. This isn't like a universal thing, but to a very large extent, the laws were either thrown out the window entirely or just much loosened much more. Now, you're going to find hundreds, if not thousands, of examples of the IDF.
Sorry.
You're going to find hundreds, if not thousands, of examples of the IDF in Gaza showing restraint. I think you could find these examples. I don't think that's a radical position to take. But that's not the showing restraint is the norm, right? So when a military does their duty as they should, then cool, we could give them credit. But the way we measure if a military is acting properly is to what extent they're violating this laws of engagement. And I think Gaza, by most measures available, including many whistleblower reports, has been quite preposterous. Let me just give an example from a whistleblower report we got. They took an old man as a human shield. They were sending him into building after building, a man in his 70s, to see if they were booby trapped. For hours, they were just using him to go into booby trapped homes. Eventually, they let him go, and shortly after, he was shot to death by a different unit. This whistleblower report is pretty significant because it actually demonstrates two separate war crimes from two separate units operating side by side. It shows a pattern. Another example, there were 3 hostages that escaped, and they were approaching a unit waving white flags. They were shot to death, not just by one sniper that misunderstood or one sniper that acted against protocol. The entire unit opened fire. 2 were shot dead. The 3rd escaped. They chased him to shoot him. I mean, that's a very serious war crime. It happened to be on our own, so we had to admit it. We couldn't keep it a secret. But think how many times this has happened with Palestinians where we don't need to admit it.
You served in Golani, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you've had this experience, but we have, where many Hamas or militants, I don't know what particular uh, organization they belong to, would wave white flags, would get close enough to kill people, and then kill soldiers. Again, in a place where the other side uses internationally agreed upon basic rules of war against their enemies, right? By using white flags as a trap, by hiding
I'm
among
actually not convinced
civilians.
Hamas does that. I'm
So
not
it may
sure.
not be Hamas, but I've seen this
No,
happen.
well,
I've seen this enough to know that it's true, and therefore I can understand why a soldier whose his friends are being shot, he's in an unfriendly territory, he's being, people are coming out of tunnels shooting at him, people are coming out with white flags and then stabbing or taking out a submachine gun and shooting at them as well. Why they would be terrified and why they would behave in such a way? I can't expect infantry people under these circumstances it doesn't mean I can explain all of your cases. I just know that the case of the hostages was tragic, but the people that did it, I don't know what was in their hearts because I don't know them, but I do know that the fear of someone waving a white flag, it becomes meaningless when so many of the militants use that as
so
a way to attack you.
we often hear these things that Hamas does, and there's a lot of most units have some filming equipment, GoPro or something else. It's quite common for soldiers to film what's going on. We hear all these claims about what Hamas does, but if there's not like consistent video evidence of them doing this, then it's either behavior that is very much on the fringes or it just doesn't exist. So I'm not saying they don't do this, but with all the footage we have of Gaza, we have not produced an example of Hamas waving a white flag and then launching an attack. Has it happened in the history of the conflict? Sure.
It's
But
not
it's
just
not.
that. There are worse
Wait,
things than that as
hold on.
well.
But it's true. It's terrifying to be a soldier, and we value our lives over those of our enemies. I get it. But we can't have a situation where now, just because we know that sometimes militants use white flags, it's okay to shoot people waving white
I'm not
flags.
saying it's okay. I'm just saying that when you consider it a war crime and you want to prosecute for it, I think Israel needs to prosecute its own soldiers. And they did that to me when they thought I misbehaved. They do that to everyone I know. It's Israel's responsibility, and
Right.
Israel has shown that they're capable of doing house cleaning. That's what they need to do. If the international community wants to get involved, it has to be more than putting out an arrest warrant on Sinwar. They have to, if in order for me to take that seriously, they need to show that our safety, survival, and dignity is important to them as well. And I'm yet to see that. So not I haven't seen it historically in previous world wars, and I don't see it right now. I
Mm-hmm.
don't see any taking that into account at all, and therefore we're locked into this tragic form of conflict that has all these terrible
Yeah.
things.
So
Which again, if what you say is true, I I obviously don't support any of that, but I didn't spend enough time in Gaza to know. But what I have seen from the bit of time that I was there, and from my friends and neighbors who did serve there, that it's impossible to tell between civilian and combatant. The combatants will shoot out of schools with children, out of hospitals.
no,
They do.
no, that's not
This
true.
is these are
Mordechai,
people that I know.
that's some of that
These are people.
propaganda.
It's not propaganda.
They're
It's
not
people that
shooting
I
out of
know.
hospitals.
They're
There has not been a single documented case of an attack from a hospital. That's some of the purest propaganda that exists.
again, I'm not I'm
There's
not one of
not
the
a
guys
single.
who gathers all the evidence. I'm sure there's people who are watching who could post stuff or whatever that do, but I know my experience and I know what I've heard from people who were there, and they're fighting an urban war in tightly packed areas of
Right.
civilians, and and the militants make sure to fight among civilians. Okay, so they make sure to fight in densely populated areas, and they're basically creating the situation where as many of their civilians die as possible, and they've been caught admitting that this is a weapon in their hands. And therefore, as I said before, it's unfortunate. It would be nice if we had, if our opponents were Swedes and English and French, but it's not our enemies. Our enemies are these Arabs, and this is the rules that they chose to
Yeah.
fight by. They wrote the rule book of this war, and they're the ones who are suffering the worst consequences. And really, it's really unfortunate that they're civilians, and many of them have nothing to do with this. They're suffering, but the only way for us to stop it, the only way to stop it is for them to not do the thing they do. They would further their own goals of having a Palestinian state, if that was their goal, by civil disobedience and peace. So they just behaved the way Gandhi did. Israel would be forced by the whole world to give up a long time ago. They don't need to fight the way they are. They chose these rules, and it's unfortunate. I'm not saying it's smugly. I wish we fought under other rules, but these are the rules that we're forced to fight in, and it's as
Well, but
unfortunate as it is. That's just,
I'm not convinced we're forced to fight in this way. Not am I not convinced. I think that
you're
there's,
convinced otherwise.
for certain, I think there's near endless ways to conduct a military operation. And I'm also convinced that there's sometimes a military solution is not the best solution. But let's just like account for the cost, right? 19 months in Gaza. It's cost us a few hundred of our own, the lives of a few hundred of our own, not to mention thousands injured,
Yeah.
tens of thousands traumatized for
PTSD,
life. We're
yeah.
brutalizing the younger generation. Over 50,000 Palestinian civilians. We've taken a blow to our economy. We're more isolated than ever before internationally, and Hamas is not defeated. Clearly, this is not a success. Like, if you just look at the toll for what we've accomplished. Oh, and the hostages, we got the hostages back through negotiations, not through military pressure.
Well,
So
the
it's like,
negotiations only worked because of military pressure. One can
you
argue.
you can make the case that we got a better terms in the negotiation because of the military pressure. So, for example, we
Not
didn't
just better terms. We've
we didn't need to
also,
release as
when
many
you say
prisoners.
Hamas hasn't been defeated, that's we wipe out entire divisions of Hamas guys, and yes, they're still in Gaza because they still have hostages.
They've recruited to the
and
same
humans.
pre-October
Yeah, but
7th
when you
numbers,
recruit
though.
as someone who deals in recruitment, when you recruit new kids who don't have training, who don't have ability, that doesn't that you replenish your numbers, but you're not a fighting force to be contended with. And I don't think Hamas is a fighting force right now that's a threat. They're a terror force that can use uh, like
You're right.
th-
They can't right now commit another October 7th. That's true.
they're not capable
But
of doing
they
that.
can maintain an insurgency for many more years, most likely,
They
unless they
can.
decide to surrender.
They can, but
But
again, as the price, we're in the middle of a very bloody war, and you're saying, "Oh, we didn't win yet, hence we lost." If we, I don't, you and I both don't know what happens if we kill the entire leadership of Hamas again, and then everyone who gets recruited gets wiped out again in completely asymmetrical warfare because they can't fight. They're just
But
new
how
recruits
will
and so on.
continuing the war like prevent the trajectory that we've taken
Neither
already?
of us know what the results will be. An argument can be made that the results will be totally isolated and Israel will lose, strategically. An argument can also be made that there's a amount of blood that's spilt at some point where the Palestinian movement realizes that by this sort of violent uprising they can't win, and then they'll be willing to make the same deal they were offered in the past of having a state that's demilitarized, that open economy, open borders, they can work in Israel, they can go all over the world. That could be put back on the table in the future. I'm on the right. I'm not a huge fan of these deals, but the state I live in, Israel, has agreed to it in the past before there were intifadas. And I think that I don't know I can't predict, all right, where it's going to go. But what I could say is that our responsibility is to fight against those that hurt us, that kill us, brutalize us, and humiliate us. And we have to kill them and keep killing them until they either give up or all die. That's your responsibility.
so,
It's dark, but that's the reality.
But
but wait.
that balances on the premise that this is an existential war.
Yeah, it is an
Beata,
existential war
let me just
because
continue
they
to.
say it's an existential war. We didn't make I'm not the one, me as in a Jewish Israeli right wing guy. I didn't decide to go on an existential war with Arabs. They're the ones who make their goals very clear. They want to clear the river to the sea, everything, all of us gone. Some of them want us all killed and even want to follow us to Europe to kill us, whatever.
That's
And
not
others,
that that's yeah,
I know
that's
that's
not a
extreme.
that's not a
And
real
some of
thing.
them just want to kick us out. But it's somewhere, you know what? Some of them want to live with us in peace as well. But ultimately, we see where it's going, and my responsibility to my family and to my people is to defeat our enemies, even if it's hard and even if it takes a long time to defeat
Well,
them.
the point that I'm trying to get at is that there's the rhetoric and there's what it is in practice. And you said
October 7th is
earlier,
what it is in practice. Yeah.
yeah, but you said it earlier that our military might is nothing compared to, or ours is much stronger than
Ours is much
Hamas's.
stronger than the Palestinian military might if you isolate it. But I refuse to accept that those are the odds. I believe that we're standing against Egypt, who made a peace agreement with us, Jordan, who made a peace agreement with us, Syria, whatever's left of that, Iraq, Iran. I believe the entire Muslim world is, as they openly say on their social media, if you just go to any of their websites, they're all waiting to see us disappear. That's what they want. That's their goal. That's the only thing that unites the ummah. Okay, and behind them you have a bunch of leftists and anti-Semites on the right that thinks that this is a great idea for Israel to disappear, and that's our enemy. The Palestinians are being manipulated to take the fall, to be victims, because by them being victims, we can be isolated politically, and that in turn will make us a weaker foe militarily, and in the future they'll be able to finally kick us out. That's my view of the conflict. So I refuse to accept this idea that it's David against Goliath when Israel is Goliath. I think Israel was David in 48, was David in 67,
Yeah, but you're
and it's
saying,
David in 2025.
rhetorically speaking, like in terms of the practice that the Arab world is united upon, they want the eradication. But in terms of military might, they're significantly weaker. So why are we fighting on a military front rather than a PR front?
I
Like,
agree that we should do more in PR.
like based on the reasoning that you've stated, why are you arguing that we should be fighting based off with military might and military force when in reality we should be fighting through diplomatic force, since what their intention is
Diplomatic means.
diplomatically, they politically want to eradicate us, that they're not capable militarily to eradicate us. So why fight with the military force rather than with the same type
That's a
of.
valid question. It's a good one, and I think that I agree that Israel doesn't do enough or is not efficient enough in making its case in the world. Okay, I agree with that. I wish we were better at it. We're not.
And can't you even see that by using such military might that it's further delegitimizing
I
it?
think our delegitimization is a process that has to do with a trend in the world, which we can get into. And I think that this may exacerbate it a bit, but I don't think it's the driving force. I think there's forces in the world between the Islamists, the anti-Semites on the right, and the left that wants Israel gone, that sees Israel as a problem, as a geopolitical challenge that needs to be overcome, and they basically want us gone. That's what I think, and I think that we don't have a choice after October 7th. I think we had to respond the way we did. I mean, we had to respond strongly. Dude, we have to respond exactly the way we did. Some can say we weren't militaristic enough at the beginning. Some would say we were. I'm not on the rank or at the level to know. I tend to actually think we should. I don't know if I should say this on camera, but I tend to think that our concern for the hostages is really what weakened us in the war, and we should be concerned for the whole nation holistically. And if the hostages are being used, if the hostages are being used as a weapon to kill thousands of us, soldiers and civilians, and disrupt the economy and destroy the country, I think that we shouldn't allow them to do so. Okay, and we should act different. We should have different priorities. But when I say that, I'm not on top, and I don't have to look the hostage families in the eyes and look at all the videos. It's easy for me to say from my couch here, but ultimately, the war we fought is a war that was forced on us. It was forced on us by a group of people who said that they're going to do the worst things imaginable to us and gave us a little sneak preview of what they're going to do on October 7th. And I think that we had to respond and you know,
So
that's that.
I just want to
Do
kind
you
of
want to pass me the water?
I want to go
Oh,
through
here,
a certain like
the water, mine. Yeah.
line of thinking. And actually, this kind of brings me back to the debate we had years ago on YouTube. But you said that the goal, you think the potential benefits of this war is to get Palestinians to the point where they're ready for peace and to stop another October 7th like attack. And I would agree with you that if we achieve those goals, that would be great. But is this the only way we could achieve those goals? Right? If these are our goals, we should assess what are the best ways to achieve them, and we took one of the single bloodiest ways to achieve them.
We reacted to an attack, bro. You get
Correct.
attacked, you react. Like, what do you want us to do? You just get
Well,
attacked.
but again, so there's countless different ways you could react. One is doing proper evacuations. One is changing level of proportionality. One is holding soldiers accountable when they commit war crimes. We don't need to do mass starvation like we're currently doing. I mean, there's a lot of
Not
different
sure.
things we could have done. We also didn't need to respond militarily. We could have evacuated all the Gazan civilians into a massive
How do you know as a civilian?
Well, you start with women, children, elderly, and then you do background checks, and you could
So you want to
deal.
round up the entire Gazan population?
Well, I would work to incentivize. I'm just giving. I'm trying to show that there's many other options.
What would be your optimal reaction to October 7th?
Well, so I'm gonna not give the most humane response. I'm gonna give one that I think that is something Israel could have sold the public, right? So there's certain like pacifist responses that I don't know if it's politically viable because of the expectations of the society, which is saying, you got us this time. We're going to defend our border. We're going to continue working with the international community to isolate you and to normalize ties with the Middle East and play the long game. I think there's a purely non-military solution that would have been political suicide and just not compelling because we have this innate desire to strike back with force. So here's a solution that plays into the force a little bit more and plays into something that I think has some appeal. You do massive evacuations, right? There's rarely war zones that civilians can't evacuate. This is one of the rare instances where civilians really have nowhere to go. We could have built a massive refugee camp in the Negev. Now, we often hear that they teach them horrible things about us, they're taught to hate us, and then we reinforce that teaching by blowing them up. Well, if we care about how they're educated, this is an opportunity to show them a different side of us, to show them that we don't hate them the way they're taught. It allows us to get all innocent people out of Gaza. And then you're dealing with Hamas and tunnels. It's a much easier threat to deal with. You don't need to destroy so much civilians. You don't even need to send many of your own people in that instance.
You don't think that people would accuse Israel of ethnic cleansing?
Well, not if they move them into Israel proper, then they're literally letting them stay on the land. But it's my position. I do think how the international community matters, but they accuse us of ethnic cleansing, but now we're being accused of genocide. So fair, the international community wouldn't like that. They'd like it a lot more than what we're currently doing. You wouldn't have daily videos of children that are blown up into pieces. Every day I see children that are in bits and pieces. I'm not so sensitive to that, but you can see how that's going to radicalize a full generation of Westerners. We're taught our whole life that children are precious, that civilians shouldn't be killed, and then daily you see American dollars sponsoring an operation that is shredding children into pieces. Obviously, that's going to radicalize. There's no way it doesn't. But just I don't want to get caught up here. The point I was making is that we should set goals of what we want to achieve and recognize that there's many ways to achieve those goals, and also recognize that we might embark on some path and not achieve those goals. But so right now we've embarked on such a bloody path with no guarantee of success. So it's like if we have options, I'd rather take the option that doesn't see tens of thousands of dead civilians, hundreds of our own, and international isolation. Seems like generally a better path to go down. But we don't need to get stuck on Gaza. But Mordechai, I just wanted to give you this info. The hostages, we didn't care much for hostages when we conducted military stuff. We negotiated for their release. That's true. So if we didn't care about the hostages, we wouldn't have released around 2,000 Palestinian prisoners. But in terms of being more careful in Gaza because of the hostages, I don't think there's a case there. There's Mordechai, are you hearing this?
I hear it.
Okay. We killed dozens of our own hostages in airstrikes, including Bibas. So, and we had a we had a policy we had a policy of blowing up homes of hostage takers, even if we had intel that the hostages might be there. But that's just a side note. Let's right. That's like a 90%.
We didn't get coffee yet.
Thank you.
I got it earlier.
But maybe let's zoom out a little bit and get more to high level stuff, because you have a lot of knowledge, you have a lot of experience, you have an interesting perspective, and admittedly, Gaza's not your area of
Listen,
expertise.
all I can respond.
You're trusting enough that the government is doing what they need to do, and that's enough for you.
I'll also concede another point, that when you were forced under the existing threat, right, of Gaza, Hezbollah, Houthi missiles, Iran, and so on, under the threat that we have right now, we're forced to marshal enormous amounts of reserve soldiers, okay, who are leaving their families, leaving their jobs, losing their career, myself included. We take
Mhm.
great risks to show up and protect our people. You're limited in how tough you can be with them. I'm not saying that they should get away with stuff, but the more with the Gaza thing, like I'm being an honest guy, I wasn't really there. I don't know. Maybe some of the stuff you say is right. Maybe all of it. I don't.
No. I realize that this isn't the optimal conversation for the two of us to have, because this just happens to be the area that I've really researched the most the past 18 months. It's been my primary focus while you've been here building on these hilltops. So I actually want to get more into that and your philosophy on that.
Let's do it.
But you could rest assured that everything I said is true.
No,
Unless there's an opinion which you
no,
can disagree with, but
I
the
rest
fact-based
assured
stuff
that
I
you did
said
good
is
research, but I don't trust that. I don't trust that it's necessarily true. Like I don't know that old man got shot on purpose. It's possible, but I don't know that to be. It could be that he got shot because it could be tragic. He was exhausted. He was walking in an area where it's a kill zone. Anyone who moves there, you kill. And I know
no. That kill zones is a problematic concept. You never have 100% evacuation.
you're in a war. Sometimes it's kill zones. You don't want to fight a war in an urban area. Don't shoot rockets from there and don't hide there. Gazans could have.
But Gazan civilians are not responsible for the irresponsibility of their government, you know.
Nor is like Dudu, the soldier, who's 19 years old. He doesn't have to die because Hamas decided
So
to throw
then we
Gazan
shouldn't send them
soldiers.
in. I mean, the role of the military is to pursue the national interests of a state, and so if we think this is important enough in our national interest, then sacrificing soldiers is necessary. I don't want to see soldiers die, and I don't think this is in the national interest of our state.
I disagree. I wouldn't sacrifice my own brothers in a war that our enemies started in order to save their civilians. I'm sorry, I wouldn't do that. We don't have the same values.
If I didn't see a way to send soldiers in a way where they could conduct themselves without the mass killing of civilians, then I would probably think that there's a better way to conduct ourselves. Now,
Whether there is or there isn't, if I'm sending troops into battle, I want them to go back alive.
But why send them into battle? Why not just nuke Gaza? That's
Nuke
the
Gaza?
safest. Yeah, that's the safest.
I'm not. Listen, nuking Gaza probably is, again, being that my priority is the safety of my own people. It probably wouldn't serve our long-term survival if we nuke Gaza, right?
Nor is what we're doing now, I would argue.
You would argue, nor is
Yeah.
what we're doing now, but
And the polling supports this. If you look at how the international community feels about
again,
us, it's not.
international community is an important element, but it's not the only element in the survivability prospects of a nation. Because if we did if we conducted ourselves in a way that the international community would be least incensed against us, we would compromise our own security and safety vis-a-vis our enemies militarily so much that we'd end up also losing survivability. So it's very easy to kind of argue where the line is and what value is more important. It's hard for me to respond. What I do know is if people come to kill you, kill them. If they run back and hide,
Right.
chase them and kill them again.
But you're saying we need to care for our soldiers more than anything. I agree. So I wouldn't send them to die.
Okay, I wouldn't send them to die either, but I can't I can't allow an enemy army to invade my country, rape, murder, torture civilians, and then take them as prisoners, as hostages, back to their place, and then not respond militarily. They have to die. Everyone involved in that has to die. There's no way they'll even 20 years from now. I'll be 60 years old if I'll be for finding anyone who was involved in October 7th and liquidating them. That needs to be done. It's just
Wait,
justice
so
and it's safety.
okay, so if let's say there were around 3,000, 4,000 people involved in October 7th, although the majority were civilians that were just looting and taking photos and shit. But like there were around a thousand militants, something like that, that came in. All thousand need to die. I don't even think that's a radical position to want justice.
All thousand need to
But
die. The whole
but at what
right.
cost? So would you sacrifice 10,000 Israelis just to get those thousand?
It's a trick question because when you fight, going into war means you take the risk that you yourself will die and that your people will die, right? If 10,000 of us die, killing 1,000 of them, that means that we're doing something wrong and they're fighting on a very high level, right? Would that be justified? It's not justified. It's required. We have to go after them and kill them no matter what the cost. Pretty much, like
Why?
why? Because one, he who spills blood of your people, you have to just you're the Middle East, you have to just on a purely human level. If someone killed your
No, no.
family,
So that's the
you
thing.
kill them. I believe in
That's a
that.
very human
I am very
response.
it's human and it's correct.
But so
Shofech
I'm not
dam
convinced it's
adam, but
correct.
you're not convinced. I
Yeah.
am, and it's an argument that I can't philosophically back up, but I do believe in it.
Even though it perpetuates that cycle.
It does perpetuate the cycle, but it only stops when the two people agree. Like there's something that we're fighting over, right? So if we're fighting over land, right, and we can reach an agreement, then reach an agreement to share the land. If we're fighting over like something deeper than land, our existence, which I believe we're fighting over, I think that the Palestinian movement is not about giving them a state, but it's about getting rid of any indigenous group that's not Arab Muslims and displacing them, making sure that the entire Middle East and North Africa is ruled by basically by Islamic. By Islam, that's what it means, and Arabs as well, because those two are sometimes interchangeable. That's the goal of the anti-Zionist movement. That's where it's going, and therefore, I don't think there's something we can give them.
I don't know if that's true though. Like,
That's what they seem to be saying. If you listen to a religious podcast of like British Muslims in India or Pakistani Muslims in Pakistan, and you listen to what they say, yeah, they'll talk about human rights, but they could solve the human rights of Palestinians by giving them refugee status. The reason they won't do that is because they need to keep them as victims, and the purpose is to cleanse the land from this humiliation of these Jews having their own state. That's what it's about. It's Zionism to them is offensive, not because it takes something from the Palestinians. Arabs have been they do much worse things to each other than Israel has done to the Palestinians historically.
much worse.
Way worse,
What?
way worse.
What?
Look at what
Which?
Turkey does to Armenia.
Okay.
What Assad did
Which Arab
to his
leader?
enemies.
Which Arab leader in the 21st century killed 3% of their enemy population? Killed 16,000 children. What Israel did in Gaza, there's no Arab leader in the 21st century that did that to another people. They just didn't.
You have to take October 7th and Iron Swords War out of the equation because we've reached that because of October 7th. If you count the Israeli-Arab conflict up until this point, right, Israel has acted less extreme, less cruel than most inter-Arab conflicts. Right? Less than Iraq-Iran, less than Syria
I
revolution,
would need to
and so
check the
on.
numbers
If you
proportionate to population size. They're much larger
proportion to the
population, but
population
I'm
and
not
to the
sure.
conflict at hand, and look at how Syrians are treating Alawites now, and Muslims and Syrians treating Alawites and Druze. There's a movement to make sure that there's hegemony of only Muslims in the Middle East. That's what it's about. That's what I think it's about. I don't think that the Pakistani or Bengali Muslim who's demonstrating for Palestine, if he's thinking about human rights the way you do, if he's thinking about human dignity, what he's thinking about is victory of Islam. That's what he wants. And everything else is a weapon. All the talk about human rights, all the talk about, genocide of Palestinians, and they use all these terms that they know that we are sensitive to as a weapon, and a pretty effective one at that.
I'm not. What you're saying very well might be true to an extent. Like it's possible that's the motivation of some Muslims. It's likely many others don't think of it that deeply. They feel some brotherhood with their or kinship with their Palestinian brothers and
Ask those
sisters.
people, would they be willing to take Palestinian refugees into Syria?
Wait, but that's
Jews are willing to think about this. Jews are willing to take Jews into Israel, no matter what. Ethiopians are being massacred in Africa, or being threatened
but it's
with
not.
annihilation because they're being accused of being Jewish. Israel takes them in. No benefit to Israel from that. There are people they're under threat. Russian Jews are being oppressed with communism. Russia's falling apart. They're not doing well there. Russian Jews can come, right? Israel never says, "Oh, we should leave them there because we have some interest in having a large Jewish population in Russia," right?
Correct.
So if the Muslim Ummah was a real Ummah and they had solidarity as they claim they do, then they would and they cared about
So no,
Palestinian rights,
but
Palestinians would be able to come. The fact that they didn't do that shows how monstrous their actual
I
goals
don't.
are.
I think that's not how I would interpret those actions. I think that, and this is because they're religious, there's something they value more than life. It's dignity and honor. Not man, this isn't only a religious concept. This is a Middle Eastern concept.
Yeah,
But no.
I'm like that too.
Yeah, exactly. So this should resonate for them. It's more so. I could take in my Palestinian brothers and sisters, but then they're losing that. That's them being ethnically cleansed. I will not accept for them to lose the fight. So for them, it's like if they need to stand the land and die, at least they can continue to resist the Zionist entity. I think that's how they're looking at it. It's not that they don't care at all about them. It's that they recognize that honor, dignity, and ultimately victory is more important than individual life, which is a fair bit different than how I look at the
You
world.
would agree that that's a monstrous way to look at the world.
That's not how I look at the world. Monstrous. Let's just say I wish more people would care about individual rights and the lives of individuals for sure. But that's my same. So I'm willing to extend that critique to other cultures around the world. But as an Israeli, that's also my primary critique of my own government because it doesn't value human rights. But I almost think this is like it's almost besides the point because even if every Muslim outside of Palestine is evil, right? Hypothetical, they're just horrible people. That doesn't change Palestinians deserving rights on this land and deserving justice, right? So their motivation and what they do, we could talk about it, speculate on it,
I only bring
but
that
I'm
in.
more
I only bring
interested.
that in because you guys keep acting as if we're the big player in the game, attacking this tiny group of Palestinians, when in fact there's a whole world of support that those that support the Palestinian cause do it, partially. They only give the Palestinians as much help as they need, not in order to help the Palestinians actually, pursue their destiny and live a better life, but only insofar as it would help destroy us. So that's what we're dealing with. And therefore, it's incumbent upon us as a group that wants to survive to not allow that to happen.
I got to break in with some questions.
Cool.
Question for you. Do you really think that 1,500 Hamas fighters were going to take down the state of Israel?
Do I think they were going to?
I suspect that what he meant was that was their intention.
Was their intention?
Like, do you think that,
yeah.
Maybe I would parse it as, do you actually think that that's what they actually think?
I think that they believe. I think it was more than 1,500. The Nukhba group was about that, but they had logistics behind it and so on. They thought that they can lull us into enough complacency to invade part of the Gaza envelope, which they did. And I'm assuming that Hezbollah would have done the same thing had we not immediately sent an enormous amount of troops to reinforce that border, and then they could have invaded part of the north. And then again, it speaks to the fact that Israel was perceived as weak because of all the protests and all the threats of of reserve guys like myself not going to serve because they're unhappy with Bibi. And because we were perceived as weak, the Hamas saw it as an opportunity to attack. They probably didn't know exactly what will happen, but it could have happened. They could have had more success than they did. They happened to have been stopped by guys who went and fought them, but it could have ended with Hezbollah invading Binyamina and a few other cities in the north. And Iran could have sent an enormous barrage of missiles and rockets that would have destroyed several army bases. I think that this could have been the attack that precipitated the end of my nation had it been executed more, efficiently than it was. Thankfully, it didn't happen, but that would be my response. Yes, I think it could have happened.
I actually want to chime in there, and I actually don't entirely disagree. I think October 7th proved to us how vulnerable we are, and that with proper coordination, our enemies, who are only getting stronger, do pose an existential threat. I
Yeah,
don't think Hamas does on their own, but
they
I
do.
think
Yeah, I don't think
I think
Hamas.
I
That's
think
right.
yeah,
Hamas
yeah,
on their
yeah.
own couldn't have done it. I think Hamas had again a big reason why we survive is because our enemies don't have solidarity. So the fact that um, uh, Shiites and Sunnis don't trust each other, the fact that Iran doesn't actually care about Hezbollah, they're just Arabs that they feel they can use and abuse and use them as cannon fodder in a proxy war. They don't actually stand behind them. That's probably why October 7th was ultimately a failure a military failure. And yeah, that's I hope I answered your question.
The next question is that how does the actions of settlers and the army in the West Bank play into your desire for a prosperous Palestine?
Did you say something about wanting a
Do I
prosperous
desire?
plan?
Yeah, I said that we wish Gaza would have been a beautiful, prosperous place that we
Okay.
can go there and go to a fish restaurant and have and have dinner there. Yeah, I did say that. I'm a settler myself. Different settlers have different uh, patterns of behavior and different ideologies. We're oftentimes maligned for things that we didn't do and didn't intend. That being said, like in any group, we have extremists who I disagree with. So the actions of the settlers altogether, is it what do I think its effect on a prosperous Arab living here? I think it could be better than it is. I think that we could when before the war local Arabs would work with me and we were partners in construction projects in Israel and in the West Bank and in Judea. We had friendly relationships, and we still do to a large extent. All the friends I had then I still have, but they don't have rights to go to Israel to work anymore. So now that's gone. Ultimately, the militant policies of Hamas is what's preventing the uh, success and the financial viability of the Arabs in Judea and Samaria. I think Arabs in Judea and Samaria could be much wealthier than they are, and they've had times where they were much more successful, but this war has been very bad for them, more than the settlers themselves. The settlers are just opportunity for more employment and opportunity for coexistence and for business development, which could have happened. And it's just the militancy that prevented it.
Okay, I'm just gonna keep asking questions, although I have some thoughts about that. What's your opinion on Gallant saying he removed all restrictions on the military early on? And what's your opinion on kill zones, the invisible lines set up where anyone who crossed it is shot by snipers?
Let's divide it up. The first question was what my opinion on Galan saying what?
Yeah, it was essentially you mentioned law of engagement. So Gallant at the early days of the work just reduced them reduce them significantly in
Like
Gaza.
in the beginning of October?
Yeah. But they've maintained until now the laws of engagement.
Again, I wasn't sent to the Gaza front. I'm an active service now, as you can see. I'm defending my hill that I live on. Um, I don't know. I don't know. I think that the laws of engagement were written for the West Bank, for Judea and Samaria, for how my daily life is over here if you come across someone that might be a threat. When you're in an area like Gaza, when you're being attacked from every window. You're being attacked from schools, where no area is considered safe from combatants. Things could be different. I don't know. I wasn't there, so I can't give you a proper answer. Second question was what?
What your opinions on the kill zones are?
Kill zones is part of any military. It's part of the arsenal of every military doctrine. Can't get into it too much, but a kill zone is an area where you designate, you make sure civilians are not allowed to go there. No one's there, and anyone who's there is only a combatant, and he gets killed if he's there, or he wins and we get killed. That's what a kill zone is. If you don't want to have a war in heavily urbanized area, then maybe you should take a page out of Israel's book and build tunnels, not just for hostages, weapons, and families of your military brass. Maybe build tunnels for your population, for your civilians, and then you can come out of the tunnels and fight like men instead of leaving your civilians on ground in their apartments and you coming out of tunnels and fighting like rats.
Can I push back on that point? What I mean, you say fight like men, but they can't compete with us militarily.
So don't.
So it's an interesting point, because one thing is to say, you know what, just give up, accept
No,
us.
don't give up. You can struggle. You can if you did what Arafat did in the 90s, right? Arafat got he basically got all this land given to him, and he built a Palestinian Authority just by putting his guns down for a few minutes or a few years. If they chose
Although,
that path,
but
wait, if after the disengagement, okay, they decided to trade and do business and not do any militant stuff, not try. There's no reason to attack us after
But
we
do you know
left
that they
Gaza.
tried? You know they tried after they were elected. They reached out to Israel for a 10-year hudna, a truce, with all sorts of terms that are probably not the most favorable for us. But we didn't counter. We didn't try to negotiate,
Because
saying.
we don't do because the word hudna is offensive. When you say 10-year hudna, any Jew who's like studied a little bit of Islamic history knows that hudna means we're going to take a break that's only there to strengthen us so that we can annihilate you in the future, like our prophet did to his enemies in Medina. So
a 10-year hudna can turn into a 20-year hudna in the second.
no, we don't want to know. I don't want a 10-year hudna that turns into 20-year
And
hudna. I
wait, no,
want
hold on. But the
either
second you have a 20-year
coexistence or
hudna,
war. If you want to fight, fight. If you want to coexist, coexist. We can. If you want to both of us live in this land, that's possible. We've demonstrated. We, as the Israelis, have demonstrated that we're willing to forego our claims on part of this land and allow and share it. And I'm not talking for myself
yeah.
personally. I was against Oslo because I thought that all this is going to happen, even though I was a kid. But even then, I said, you know what? If this thing works, I'm going to have to be a leftist because we can live in peace. Is better than living in war. They chose to administer their need for dependence by fighting. And if you want to fight and you choose to fight among your civilians, that's on you. Again, it's not on us.
So
We're going back to our previous
no,
argument.
but it's a new thread. So, I mentioned what I think Israel could have done differently, but I could say the same for Hamas. I wish when Hamas got elected, they said, you know what, we want the best for our people. We're done fighting. We're going to recognize Israel's right to exist. We're just going to work on building Gaza. I wish that's what they did, right? But I also recognize that I could wish all I want. That doesn't mean there's a given who they are and how they function. I don't think that's not a realistic expectation that they would just function
It's
that
not
way.
their identity. They're an Islamic
Correct. Yeah.
jihadist sect of
Now,
Palestinians. That's what they want.
I agree. It's for that reason, it's not a realistic expectation that they would do that. But I think that if we want to talk about counterfactuals, I think that would have been a much better approach for the people of Gaza and the Palestinian cause. I do think, though, Israel doesn't provide clear means for how to achieve goals without violence. Like, it's not like, aside from just giving up and accepting the status quo as it is, it's not like there's a clear path for how they could make political progress through political means. Israel has not given a clear path, and you do have many examples of peaceful resistors that then get arrested and harassed by Israel. But what I'm more interested in looking at, because I think we often talk about the tunnels as if that's like the reason why the civilians we're killing is okay. But if you decided that you are not going to surrender to Israel and you want to keep fighting. You can't fight with them militarily. You can't compete with them. You put a structure in the open, it gets bombed. You fight with them on the battlefield, you get bombed. The only reasonable way for them to fight is to actually build a tunnel city. They're essentially separating themselves from their civilian population by existing in this tunnel city. Now, it's true that these tunnels are under civilian infrastructure. I mean, it's all throughout Gaza. It's impossible to build a tunnel city without being under civilian infrastructure. And it's also true that the exits of some of these tunnels are in civilian buildings. But this whole idea that like they built tunnels. Yeah, okay. So what's the alternative? Either surrender or have no means to fight us. This is literally if they choose the military route, they did it in the smartest way possible.
If they did it, I don't know if it was the smartest way possible. It depends what your goals are.
How else could they fight us though? Like this is literally the only way they could compete in any way.
Again, it's not my problem to think of better military options for them. It's not really not my issue. Because again, my responsibility is to my people, not to their people. If they want to fight and they choose to build the tunnels that they build and they choose to keep their civilians above ground, then everything that happens to the civilians and the war that they started is on them, not on us.
We won't get back into this one. Yeah. Anyways.
Next question.
The next question is, when we were talking about the peace process and that Palestinians should take a more nonviolent approach towards peace, one of our community members was asking about the people of Musafar Yatta, whose town is currently being demolished for a settlement, where the documentary filmmaker is from No Other Land. But Adar, do you know more
The
about
one
that? What's
in
happening?
South Hebron Hills, right?
Not deeply. Yeah, I think
Something
that
in South
one. Yeah.
Hebron. So the village is being demolished for a settlement. And the question is, my
I
opinion
think
on
he's
that?
trying to illustrate that this was a town of nonviolent resistance and now it's being demolished in silence.
Listen, I kind of feel for them because my village where I live is also sometimes demolished or parts of it demolished when I break the law and build illegally. There's laws in this country that include the Judea and Samaria where one can build and where one cannot build. I'm not involved enough in the legalities of that case, but what I do know is that the neighbors around me, when they argue in court that their private property rights are being violated, they get heard, and the army is ordered to stand down, and we can't do anything about it, and they get to tend to their fields and to live where they own land, and for the most part. If there's injustice being done, there's a court system. Israel's court system is respected all over the world. It's one that takes into account these lawsuits, and they should make a lawsuit. I can't adjudicate that. But if they think that resisting violently would be better than resisting non-violently, then what can I say? That's their choice, and they write the rules of engagement, not us.
If you knew that Israel's long-term survival was guaranteed, even if they nuked Gaza, would you do it?
Would I nuke Gaza?
If you knew Israel's long-term survival was guaranteed, even if they nuked Gaza.
Okay. Do I need to nuke Gaza to survive?
Not sure how it works.
No, what's the question?
No. But so it's based on our past. So the hypothetical would be there are other ways to survive, but the way to deal with Hamas without sacrificing our soldiers is to nuke Gaza. But that won't lead to our demise because of what other repercussions there might be.
Would I use a nuke on Gaza if I knew that I wouldn't have to pay the price of international isolation in order to save? And what would be when you say nuke Gaza, we mean like not a tactical nuke. We're talking about a nuke that would wipe Gaza off the earth. Is that the question?
No, let's say
Is that the scenario? Like
half a
Nagasaki.
million deaths.
500,000 Gazans go
to save the 500 we sacrificed.
to save how many soldiers? 500.
So
Jewish
far,
soldiers?
it's been around 500, but I think a fair. It's
What would
gonna
be, how many soldiers do I need? One soldier for 500,000 Gazans? 1,000 soldiers? How many?
Currently we're at 500, but the hypothetical is to defeat Hamas, and we sacrificed 500, and they're not near being defeated. So let's say over the next few years,
Like we can nuke them and sacrifice no one.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's a good question.
We got a good community,
That's a good question. 500,000 Gazans are gone, right?
Random. Women, children, elderly.
I can't answer that. I really don't know. It's hard for me to answer. Like, it's really hard for me to answer. To be honest, I don't. I can't. If I say yes, I wouldn't feel comfortable. If I said no, I would. I know saying yes, I'm sacrificing all these innocent people. But if I'm saying no, then I'm sacrificing my own people. It's very hard. This is a conflict of two values that I have. It's very hard for me to respond. Obviously, on October 8th, I would have said, yeah, nuke him, because it was October 8th, and I was seeing all the videos. Today, I'm not so sure. There'd probably be other factors as well.
We got another question here. If you value preserving life, unlike the savage Muslims, why wouldn't you advocate that Israeli Jews leave for a safer region, not surrounded by 500 million genocidal Arabs?
Because in this particular matter, I am more. I don't think. I don't think all Muslims are savage. I think we have what to learn from Muslims as well. By the way, I do think Muslims have what to teach us, and one of the things they have what to teach us is about dignity, and I believe that my Zionism is not an attempt to be it's not a pure safety attempt. I believe that my roots are here, and I'm willing to risk. I'm willing to live a riskier life here than a safer life in Minnesota, because my life here has meaning. My life in Minnesota less so. And surrounded by 500 million Muslims who want to kill us, I find more meaning living here, surviving, fighting for my existence, than living in Scotland safely. And yeah, so I don't think the Muslims, I'll go deeper with you. I'll say that the fact that Muslims have such a primitive way of looking at the world, us versus them, Dar al Harb, Dar al Islam, their approach is part of what makes them an easy enemy to defeat. And the reason they're so easy to defeat is because they choose to, those that are fighting us choose to look at the world in such a backward, tribal, um, religiously fanatic way. And I think that's why they'll never win. And our being here, not only is it good for our dignity in the long term, it's good for our survivability, because in the past, our survivability in the diaspora hasn't been great, and to say the least. And I think that when the Muslims will be able to defeat us, that's when they'll become like humanist. They'll be scientific, and then they won't want to destroy us. They'll understand that we belong here. So it's kind of a catch-22. I don't know if I'm getting too meta here, but it boils down to the fact that the the psychology that makes them a foe that will never give up is also making them a foe that will always defeat. Once they become someone that can defeat us, that may take a certain amount of intelligence and broad-mindedness and group solidarity, that if they had that, they would also understand that we belong here and they wouldn't want to fight us to the same degree.
But isn't your justification for the offensive the same kind of primitive tribalism?
I said, I don't think that everything the Muslims do and the Arab Muslims do is wrong. I think certain things they have, I admire. The family values, the group, the way the hospitality, as you see. But I also think that this idea of sticking to your land and not giving up is a noble idea. And I share it. I had the same thing. We've had it for 2,000 years. We never gave up on our land and we've come back. And I think that it's eminently justified that the Jewish nation, who lived in the Middle East as well, deserves a part of this land in the Middle East, their ancestral homeland, just like Arabs deserve their part. And Armenians deserve their wherever they are, and Kurds and so on. And I think that their inability to accept that is what makes them so easily defeatable.
But isn't that the same logic for you and your belief?
No, because I don't have a problem with Arabs having a state anywhere. Even here, my problem with Arabs having a state here isn't because this land is so holy and Arabs are filthy, like Abu Mazen said, the Jews, they're filthy feet on the Temple Mount. I'm not bothered by Muslims worshiping the one God that we came up with. That was our idea, monotheism. I don't have a problem with Muslims worshiping on the Temple Mount. I'm not offended by their presence here. They're offended by my presence here. Okay, what I share with them is that I'm willing to take risks and I'm willing to fight and die in order to stay on my land. That I share with them. But I'm not willing to kill other people so they don't have land that I consider sacred. I consider that a level of barbarism that's it's unjustified. I wouldn't go with that.
Do you
That's
think
very
it's
different.
do you think it's particularly manly to bomb people and kill them with drones? Does that count as fighting like men? Somebody's asking.
That's a good question. Yeah, you as a man, you want to protect you protect your soldiers from dying. You also get more precision. It's easier to kill specifically the terrorists with a drone and not kill bystanders. I think that you know what's manly? To use your mind, to use technology, to use the best. Not just to be brave in war, but also to be smart. Okay, if bravery was what won the wars, then Japan would have defeated the Allies in World War II. But it's also technology, and it's also having a industrial base, and it's also being smart, and using drones is smart.
Okay, have a question?
You said we came up with the idea of God. That sounds like something an atheist would say.
Okay, are you accusing me of being an atheist?
I think either something about the framing or it was a Freudian slip.
I'll tell you this. I believe that when I say we came up with the idea of God, I meant what I said.
We discovered that God, you're
We
saying.
were the ones who had this idea that there's only la ilaha illallah, there's only one God. What does that mean? That means that everything that's not God is false, that superstition is false, that there's no intermediaries, there's only one uh like first cause force that started everything. We were the ones. We may not have been exactly the first ones. There may have been earlier versions of
Zoroastrianism, or it's in Iranian
Zoroastrian.
Zoroastrianism is still
Zoroastrianism. Yeah.
dualism, so it's not exactly that. But maybe the Egyptians started worshiping only the one Amun Ra or something like that first. But we were the ones who popularized the idea that idols are false and that God is true. And the Muslims and the Christians owe us a debt of respect for that because they took that from us and they built an entire civilization on that. They should not be begrudging us that tiny strip of land that we're on, which is where like 90% of the Quran is reworked Bible stories. That's part of our canon, that we were the ones who contributed to the world. And there's no reason for this. Just like there's no reason for us to disrespect a billion monotheists, and I consider Muslims to be monotheists, there's no reason for them to disrespect the father religion that begat them, that we gave birth to them. Their ideas came from us. You can see it linguistically, you can see it from reading their literature. And the fact that we want to live here with dignity as our own separate people should not incense them as much as it does. And it really bothers me that we can't be united in faith and in love instead of locked in this endless war over that's really just not going to go
You'd
anywhere.
like to see harmonious Middle East with Israel as part of it,
Yeah,
where
I want to have a harmonious Middle East with all ethnic, religious groups be given dignity and respect. I think all nations should be able to um, what was the word for it? Realization,
self-determined.
self-determined. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it includes if the Arabs in Israel, between the river and the sea, really feel that they're a separate nation, they deserve that too. But they've done everything they can to convince us that what they really want is us to disappear. And that's why I don't trust that claim. But it's not because I don't have this exclusionary idea that they shouldn't exist, even though it would
Right.
come at my expense.
I think one of the reasons why this conversation is important is because, and you do express and intellectualize this differently from most other Israelis, but you're representing the Israeli position very clearly, that I think most people around the world don't understand. You would love to live here in peace with your neighbors, where we can visit one another's land, where we're free to travel, a beautiful, harmonious Middle East. This is actually the wish of most Israelis. But you feel like you're in a situation where currently it's us or them, and we need to do certain things to them to protect us, which some would say that's a misguided thought, but I think the way you view it is as most humans would in your shoes. If you're an Israeli and you have dealt with security threats your whole life and you've lost friends and you see it as we've been willing to compromise and they haven't. And while I would like to compromise, if they're unwilling, I will oppress them if that comes at my security. People see that as, oh, that's Zionism, that's extremism. Yeah, there's something extreme about it, but it's actually a very normal reaction given our circumstances. So
I'll throw another black pill into
I
that.
just want one more line, and that's why, at least my advocacy, I have no problem criticizing and even demonizing Israel and its institutions, but I never do that to the people because I think we're all just responding to the environment around us, them as well. Their violence, I get it. Our violence, I get it. Do I agree? No, but do I understand it? Yeah. So I think you do a very good job explaining that, and that's why.
That's what we're here.
Yeah, that's why we're here.
Another thing that makes me pessimistic is how this dispute has been internationalized. So let's say that the pattern you've noticed since Oslo, whenever there's a state where Jews and Arabs in Judea and Samaria seem to be getting along, and there's financial incentive for both sides to lower the flames of the conflict, right? There's always money coming in from Iran, Qatar, or some other interested party that to create enough terror, usually from the Arab side, but not only necessarily, to kind of re-inflame and reignite the conflict. And because this is a powder keg and because this is the Middle East, I don't see how we can prevent that from happening. So let's just say theoretically, this war ends however it ends. And here in Judea and Samaria, the Arabs and Jews decide to work together and workers going into Israel, and everything's okay. And they're making money, we're making money, they're feeding their families, they have autonomy. Things kind of reach a stage where there's kind of trust between the two peoples. There's always going to be some asshole in Tehran who has some financial or religious interest to stir things up.
Or Lockheed Martin or whatever.
Or anyone else. Yeah. And I think that kind of makes it impossible. It's like kind of makes me feel like we're never really going to reach a stage where we can agree to disagree and kind of coexist.
Because external actors are always going to throw a wrench in it.
Yeah.
And not to mention, even a very small minority of extreme Israelis and Palestinians could also throw a wrench in it. So we almost need to accept violence will be part of any solution we pursue. Oh, yeah.
We got another question here. Does your harmonious Middle East include rights and self-determination for the Palestinians?
Rights, yes. Self-determination, yes, but not necessarily in the way you think. I don't accept the argument. I'm putting my foot in my mouth. They could have just stopped now. I don't accept the argument that, we just let all the law of return and let all the Arabs vote, all the Palestinians that come back here vote, and then the state will be what it is. Because that fundamentally is a Lebanonization of Israel, and we're gonna be run out like the Christians in Lebanon, and our rights will be violated. It'll be even worse because we're considered these big demons. And in reality, you talk about rights, and maybe for Norman Finkelstein or Noam Chomsky, that's this discussion of rights. But what that means in reality is us being abused, murdered, and displaced. So what I would do is I would have they get their property rights protected. They get to vote in their own. We're the only ones that in the area that actually have a democracy. So I think that, let's say here in Judea, I would have them. They would have their own different, like sort of like Kedar's plan, where they all have autonomy in their own cities, villages, and regions, and then they would vote or exercise political rights in Jordan or some sort of federation, not part of Israel, because I refuse to allow this idea of democracy to one person, one vote to displace us again.
What if it was after generations of peace? Like
I'll be dead by then, so it's hard for me to know what I'll think if I was
In
alive
your
then.
next life.
Yeah, but it could be things will be different then. But to me, the need for the Jews to have a protectorate where Jews can be Jews, where it's never challenged in the middle in their historic homeland, is the most important thing to me. And I'm not giving that up because some voting rights for refugees, that's not going to happen, and at least not on my watch. I don't want to violate other rights they have, but I would not give them the voting right to allow them to do
What
that.
if the only way to achieve that without it being challenged is for them to have their own state next to ours, and we need to clear this area out? Or at the very least, you would be a resident of Palestine and a citizen of Israel.
Look, if the conflict can be settled, okay, and ended, no resistance, no terror,
We're done.
we're done. We're settling the conflict, and part of the settlement of the conflict is the Palestinian state, which will include where I'm living right now, and I can still live here as a citizen in their state, and then the Arab Israelis that want to identify as Palestinians can still live in Israel, and so on. I wouldn't vote for that, but I wouldn't like do civil disobedience to prevent that. I wouldn't vote for it because I wouldn't believe that that's where it's going. But if I actually was convinced that that's what happened, I would begrudgingly accept that because it's
Okay.
giving up, things that I believe is historically ours. But I would accept that as my existence. But again, I'd have to be convinced that that the conflict is ending.
Right. Okay. That's fair. It shows that there's some of your motivation has some.
Pragmatic.
Well, yeah, there's certainly a pragmatic approach, and that it's about ensuring a protectorate, and even if it's at the expense of all of our historic homeland. Whereas some other people, maybe your neighbors, live by the sword for eternity. We're not given
Even
a
those
single
guys,
inch up.
you need to have people to say that in order for this. If
You
everyone
think
said
when
what I
push
said,
comes to shove, they could also agree to something like
maybe
that?
they wouldn't agree, but they would get outvoted. And just like in Oslo, they demonstrated and they accepted it. They
Right.
would accept it as well. Um, Again, these things are rarely black and white. And yeah, we also have people that I myself maybe a few years ago wouldn't have said this. Would have said, "No, I'm willing to die for every last inch of land." I don't hold those views today.
What's changed?
Just my need for my desire, my need, my belief in the survival of my people, and thinking of it holistically shows that
Okay.
that approach would not ensure our success and our destiny. Our destiny wouldn't be best served if those were the policies we had.
Last question here. Would you evacuate yourself from Judea and Samaria if that would be a condition for achieving long-term peace? So no hudna, but real peace in the neighborhood.
We pretty much answered that. Well, we didn't answer, would you evacuate?
Evacuate,
Yeah,
yeah.
it was.
If it's real peace, then why can't I live? Why can an Arab a Palestinian live in Ramla and Lod and Mordechai not live in Bethlehem?
So let's say you lived here, but under Palestinian sovereignty.
He just answered
That
that.
should be an option.
Yeah,
If me living here, if I'm so revolting to the Palestinians that I can't live here, then obviously you're not making a real peace. And if my safety won't be protected here the way an Arab Israeli is protected, an Arab Israeli citizen is protected in Israel, then that too means the peace is not a real peace. It has to include the option of me living here.
Cool. Any before we wrap it up, anybody here have a question?
Yeah, I had one from the last time we spoke when we were talking about just the pragmatics of losing the like the long-term war in terms of international support. And I was saying that even if you don't talk about the future potential military success in Gaza, if it's even worthwhile to continue the endeavor with the long-term effects of losing almost all international support. And I was saying, now I'm remembering, I was saying, like, if you lose the allyship of the West and people who have more liberal and progressive values, then the only allies left would be authoritarians like Russia, North Korea, China. Well, I wouldn't say China's authoritarian, but
You don't think China's authoritarian?
well, not as authoritarian as North Korea
Russia?
and
I think
Russia.
they're probably similar to Russia. So, well, for now, our enemies have North Korea, Russia, and China, and we have the West. Now, the West is on a trajectory of betraying us, but that's the same trajectory as betraying themselves. Not one, the same Western, the same energy that's calling to basically demolish Israel or free Palestine from the river to the sea is the same energy that's making London look like Somalia and Paris look like, you know, like a refugee camp. It's the same. So in order for, I don't know if that tide of wokeness can be stopped by us um, by us allowing ourselves to be slaughtered or not taking our security seriously. I don't think that's going to stop the tide. I think, on the contrary, I think that it would make it worse because, like, kind of like when we left Gaza, it didn't give us any points. We left Gaza, and then we were considered bad for blockading them, which we did because we didn't want to get rocketed and killed. I think it would get worse and worse, and then it would be attacked again when there's an opportunity. I think that the I can't say I have a strategic vision of how to get support in the West. I don't. To say I don't have that vision, I don't know. But I do think that we still have pockets of support among evangelical Christians. I think we have support in countries like Hungary, like Czech Republic, and minorities in the Middle East that feel threatened, like the Druze, like the Kurds. I think we can form alliances with them. And I think that maybe we'll go through a time where we're sort of isolated and we'll pay a price for it. Don't forget, we've been there before. Now is the time for us to shore up our strength and build our economy and build an industrial base so that we can survive without constantly being refueled by the West.
Any last thoughts you want to leave us with?
Yeah. I'll say this. This is how it would end.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm only in uniform because I'm in Miluim. This is not a statement of intent of any form. It's me doing my job. I have to do this. If it was up to me, there'd be no uniforms and there'd be no conflict. Ideally, I believe that the Middle East, the Fertile Crescent, this whole beautiful area, there's so much history, both bloody bad history and positive, great discoveries of the human mind and of the consciousness that has happened here. I think all of us, all the different groups here, we owe it to our ancestors to find a way to allow every group to reach its full potential without coming at the expense of another group. Okay. I don't believe that in order for us to build a temple and live our destiny in our ancestral homeland, we necessarily need to displace anyone or hurt anyone. And it's a tragedy that this conflict has reached religious overtones when it's really the thing that should unite us. And we all believe in the same God. We believe in most of the same prophets. The prophets we disagree with, no one will find out in this world, only in the next. So there's no reason to rush it. And I think that we should treat each other as brothers and sisters, and hopefully be able to share this earth and all of its abundance without resorting to murdering each other.